My name is Jasmine, and today we're going to be talking about everything I learned about the Sonoran Desert throughout the entire period of the 6-week class. The Sonoran Desert is a very, very diverse and life-filled place. When you would look at it at first glance, you'd be like, wow, this place looks dead and hot and dry, and it feels like nothing can live here because it's 115 degrees outside. But you'd be wrong, because the Sonoran Desert is in fact a place that has been developing and adapting over the course of probably 4 centuries now. The Sonoran Desert, we started with in module 1 of like just kind of the basic geography of the region and how it like came to be, how the specific niche of the area started because of weather and stuff. And pretty much what happened was it used to be a wetland, and then a bunch of volcanoes exploded around that little ring of fire that we have in the Pacific North America. And then after those volcanoes exploded, they made the lava melted or solidified and turned into rock, and then it became, over time water goes through, and then it makes life, and then soil and organic matter decomposes into it, and blah 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 blah, and then you have the Sonoran Desert. Wow. Pretty much, so that's kind of what we went over in module 1, and then I was like, how does a desert even happen? What classifies something as a desert? And pretty much a desert is like, it gets very little to no precipitation. It is very dramatic with its weather stuff. It has like super, super hot days, very, very cold nights, harsh winds, like extreme environments that you would assume nothing can live in, probably because you wouldn't be able to survive in it alone. And that's because your body is not adapted to live in it, unlike all of the plants and animals that have lived in the Sonoran Desert for centuries now. And that's kind of where we get into like the module 2 era, where it was like the specific like biomes and like the riparian zones where things like live and thrive, and like how things live in different biomes and why things live in different biomes. Oh, and I have a picture for it for you. This is a map of all of the different biomes that you have in the Sonoran Desert. We have the Arizona upland, the lower Colorado River Valley, the plains of the Sonora, the Central Gulf Coast, the foothills of the Sonora, the Vicchiano region, and the Magdalena region. The most common one that people think of when they think of the Sonoran Desert is the Lower Colorado River Valley, because that's just kind of like the flat, dry, harsh valley of shrubs and cactuses that live there. But there's actually a lot of diversity in all of these different biomes. Pretty much they're all their own niche little thing, and they're usually dependent on, elevation differences, because the higher up you are, the different types of winds you have, the different precipitation levels you have, the different rock structures you have, the higher up you are too, and then the way that the wind hits the rock structures creates different weather patterns, pretty much. And that's why there's like areas of no rain. That's why the deserts hardly get any rain at all too, is because of the giant mountains that live to the left and right of it that stop the clouds from rolling over there and then just keep them over there. And then that's why when they do get rain, it's really dramatic, because it's these giant storms that went all the way over the mountains and then just freaking, excuse my French, they flood the entire region. And this is an example of a riparian zone. This is the area where water runs through the desert, and everything's like, wow, water, let's live there. And so it lives there. And riparian zones can be found throughout in all the biomes. And usually the diversity hotspots where things can really thrive and survive is where these different biomes start to like meet up with each other. And that's because things can go pop back and forth between different little areas, and like they could live in an area that's cooler and then pop down to the harsh desert and go get their snack and then come back home for their night. And so that's kind of what we learned about in module 2, was kind of like, the different biomes and stuff. Module 3 was kind of when we get into like, how do things live in the desert if there's hardly any water? And that's because of aquifers and the monsoons, which I kind of already talked about, but that's pretty much what popped up in module 3, was like aquifers and how things store water. So pretty much the water comes down, and then they go down these underground little tunnels, and then there's these giant like caves full of water that hold water, and because they're underground, they're cooler and they don't evaporate by the sun, so you get to keep water. Oh, and I have a picture for you too. That's an aquifer. And that's a picture of a monsoon, the ones that I was talking about before. That's how they get all their water, and that's how things survive. Is once water comes, they hoard the water, and a lot of species have adaptations that like help them hoard the water, and then they can use the water later. So pretty much everything in the desert is just built to hold water when they can get it, and if they don't get it, they'll be okay for a little bit longer, and then they just hope and pray that they eventually get it if they're not by a riparian zone, which sometimes, according to modern events, climate change is kind of hurting a lot of biodiversity because it's kind of taking a lot of the water away because of droughts and AI data centers. But that's a problem for a different class. The next stuff we get into is kind of like the diversity of the area. We're getting into like modules like 5, 7, and 8 is where we get into like the different diversity of plants and animals that live here. This is my favorite animal. It's the jackrabbit. And this is a picture of a food web from the desert. And pretty much it's just kind of like where we get into the insane adaptations of all these different plants and animals. Like for example, the little kangaroo rat doesn't need to drink water at all for its entire life. Like it could survive without water in its system because of its fantastic kidneys. I mean, I imagine it gets hydrogen and oxygen from various different areas, from food and fruits and stuff like that. But like, it can go its entire life without any water, and that's crazy. And a lot of plants and animals and living creatures and little bugs and stuff that live in the desert have these adaptations that are fit specifically for the Sonoran Desert region, so they're very niche. And I know we're going a little bit longer than we should today, but I've taken this so many times, and we're just gonna go with this one because it's great. But pretty much what we get into in this area is kind of like the niche adaptations of a lot of these animals and wildlife that live here. And for example, like the saguaro cactus is a keystone species, by the way. Also, a wolf is a keystone species, and some other things. There's like the turtle, that's a keystone species. And a keystone species is what is like, it's a big species that everything depends on. Like, so many things in the desert depend on these keystone species to live, to eat, to have shelter, to provide water for all of the above, pretty much. And without the keystone species, then a lot food web collapses, pretty much. What was I getting at though? Oh, pretty much the flow of energy. And so in the desert, life is surrounded about water and food and shelter, which is, everywhere. But for the desert specifically, for the Sonoran Desert specifically, it's very hard to find water, food, and shelter. And it is very necessary because the sun is so harsh and the elements are just like thrown in the face. And so everything that lives there, naturally occurring, has these adaptations to survive in these harsh conditions because of the millennia of species before them that are doing the whole natural selection thing, where they go through all of that good stuff and then they find ways to survive. And so pretty much in the Sonoran Desert, there's a lot of crazy niche adaptations because the conditions were so harsh that the animals that did survived because of these miraculous mutations that were like, wow, this works really well. And then they kept making little babies, and now we have the niche stuff that we have today, like the kangaroo rat that doesn't need to drink any water. Very interesting. Here's the next slide. We have a picture of a bat drinking some nectar from a saguaro cactus, and then a little woodpecker. And this is also just going into the example of like why like the keystone species here, the saguaro cactus, and like why things depend on it. And it's pretty much because you can live in it, you can eat its flowers, you can drink the water that comes from it, and lots of good stuff like that. When these birds move out, owls move in. It's beautiful, it's amazing. So pretty much the web of interactions is what keeps things alive in the desert. Like, nothing in the desert would survive if one keystone species fell completely, which would be bad. And they would have to just like find some new adaptations, but adaptations take a very, very long time to happen. So, the interconnectedness of everything that lives in the desert, I'm putting this down as my last one, is very important. And it's also like ever present in everything. Like, everything in this environment is connected and is dependent on one another to survive and have a healthy life with one another. And this is where you get into like the different relationship types that we learned about in modules like 8 and 12, where it's like mutualism, commensalism, and parasitism, and all that good stuff. And that's kind of just about like Mutualism is like I give you something, you give me something, and we're all both happy. Commensalism is like I give you something and you don't really care, and you're like, okay, thank you. It doesn't affect you really. Parasitism is like I take something from you and you die, and that's kind of like the desert mistletoe. It does that in the desert. It's like a common one. It like hooks onto plants and it steals their water, which is the most important resource in the Sonoran Desert. So you have these different relationships and stuff like that. Like the keystone species are keystone species because of their importance to relations to everything around them. So the more relations you have with the living things around you, the more important your livelihood is. And so like keystone species like the wolf is good because it eats the things that eat all of the plants, and if something's eating all the plants, then a lot of species will die because of that, because they have no plants to eat. And so that's why wolves are important, because they eat the deer that eat all the plants. And so stuff like that is a big one in the Sonoran Desert because it's very, very harsh conditions, and so these things that live there have very, very niche relations with each other, and very specific things that they do for one another, and it's a very, very diverse and intricate web. We're at about 10 minutes, and I'm so sorry. Pretty much to close this out, everything I learned in this class helps me because it helps me view a harsh and somewhat like dead environment, because to me a desert looks dead. Like it looks open and nothing's growing and it's all shrubbery and it's all dead, but it's actually not. And I feel like this class has kind of helped me reinstate that in my brain, that even though something doesn't look like a lush forest, that what I'm used to from where my home is, it still is full of rich diversity and so many relationships that I couldn't even think about until I take a class like this that teaches me the specifics about all of them. And pretty much I got all of this information for my citing of sources from all of the modules that I got from Canvas and all of the resources that came with all of that stuff. And I think that's everything. I'm so sorry for the long time, but I hope you enjoyed it. This is my take number 5 now, so we're just gonna submit this one and call it a day. Okay, thank you, bye.